who's in Dublin, Tori Amos in Cornwall, John Partridge over in Eltham, and Flavian Obiero in East Sussex. Now, as the nation's barnets get ever wilder, more out of control and a touch greyer at the roots, we are talking this morning about your hair and the times that you have cheated with hairpieces, extensions, wigs. Tori Amos, a very good morning to you. You have recently had a wig made. Why?
Yes. Hi, Reverend. Hi, Susie. Hi, gang.
Hi.
Yeah, a Serpa Figs. I ordered one because I'm doing live videos next week for the book launch. And so she's been made up. She's in the other room, and we're calling her Quarantina.
Can you describe Quarantina? Is she luscious?
Oh, she's gorgeous. She made her way from the States, and she's been here for 2 weeks in the other room because, you know, she had to have social distancing. And she's gorgeous. She's got rollers on, and I have to follow. I have to do this, what do you call it? A tutorial, no pun intended, to figure out how to get her on, and my 19-year-old daughter's going to help.
She sounds ridiculously high maintenance. We'll talk more about her later, no doubt. Tori Amos is with us as well. I just wanted to talk to Tori. Are you somebody who runs 50 miles at the sight of icing sugar and a sieve, or are you naturally at home in the kitchen in Cornwall there?
Well, I'm finding that cooking really calms me down. And so we have 2 vegans in the house. We have a full house here. So I'm learning vegan cooking.
And what is your signature dish, Tori Amos? Impress me.
Mushroom magic.
I love the title, if nothing else. Doesn't even need to taste good with a name like that.
Yeah, I have to keep husband from spiking it so that the teenagers, you know, go to bed early. But, you know,
miso paste, that's all I can say. Just put miso paste and everything and vegans will be truly happy. So are you, you're enjoying that kind of taking time in the kitchen? Because you're usually on a tour bus somewhere.
Yeah, I was set to be on a book tour right now in the States and then come back here to England and do that. But, of course, lockdown happened and we happened to be here in Cornwall, which I'm so grateful we're in Cornwall, to be honest.
Well, you and the Quarantina wig with her pink curls and everything in, and the kitchen. It's a very nice picture of domestic bliss over there in Cornwall. We have lots of your stories of wiggery and fun from all over the UK coming in this morning. Her home in Cornwall, she has her own wig, which has its own bedroom. It's that important. Tori is there with Quarantina and a full house. Tori, I was talking to John Partridge earlier about this, I suppose, the exposure very, very young to being in an industry where you have to be a public persona, and you were performing from such an early age and sort of getting out there. Were you a natural stage animal, a stage performer? Was that girl who wanted to wear the wig and the big dramatic things always there, or did that take a while to come?
Well, having a father, he's a reverend as well, and he wanted to be Billy Graham. So there was a side to me that would watch my father from the pulpit, and he would roll me out during church services to whip out a hymn here and there, holy, 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 or there's a balm in Gilead, you know, lots of hits in the Methodist hymnal from, of course, Charles Wesley. So, yeah, I had mixed emotions about it because my dad was such a big personality, and so much of being a pianist is you're alone practicing. And, you know, my mother would play her records. She was quite a DJ. When he would leave to go to church, the apron, she'd whip it off. And there was this amazing minister's wife spinning Fats Weiler and Billie Holiday and Blue Eyes Frank Sinatra. And he had no idea what was going on when he was at his church.
Since Little Earthquakes, her first solo album, which set everyone a tremble in 1997. She's made 14 more, sold at least 15 million records, is the only inductee to the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame to be named after a tree. I think I did have a look. And has never shirked confrontation or challenge, not only for her audience, but for herself as an artist, exploring the neighbouring worlds of classical music and music theatre and literature. Her latest project is a second volume of memoir called Resistance, a songwriter's story of hope, change and courage. Let's remind ourselves of some of those songs.
It's been silent all these years. Honey, bring it close to my lips, yeah. Honey, bring it close to my lips. Honey, bring it close to my lips. This is not really happening. You bet your life it is. You bet your life it is. Let's sort a fairy tale with you. Let's sort a fairy tale with you. Nothing to do is good enough for you. Crucify myself every day. I crucify myself. My heart is sick of being. I see my heart is sick of being in chains.
Plenty of hope, change and courage in what we just heard there from Tori Amos's musical career. But it occurred to me, Tori, that that preacher man dad of yours was not only someone who would have given you some ideas about performance, but he also gave you some ideas about vision. He stood in a tradition of prophecy, and that prophetic voice is one that you raised too.
He's quite something, you know. He, I think, was really disappointed. He was more than that devastated when I got kicked out of conservatory, because the trajectory was, when I was 5, that I'd be on a concert stage playing classical music. And so when that ended, and I was sort of thrown out of the Peabody Conservatory, he couldn't accept it, Reverend. It was really hard for him. So he came up with another idea, which was to take me down to the bars and try and get a job at 13. And that was really quite something. He had his dog collar on, and I was dressed up in my sister's clothes. My poor mother, of course, was in North Carolina and would not have allowed it to happen. But he just said, you know, you're ruining your life, and we have to get out of this state of failure.
I mean, I love this idea. There's something that I've always admired about American music and the way it's taught compared with Britain, although it's changed a lot now, is that the kind of membrane between popular culture and classical culture was much thinner there. But it is quite a shift, isn't it, going from the Peabody Conservatory, which you entered at a ridiculously early age, to finding yourself in the gay bars at 13, becoming who you are, discovering your voice.
Yes, with my father's chaperoning. No one would, there was no room at the inn, as they say. I'd said to Dad, I said, really, Dad, we don't have to tell anybody that this didn't work out so well. Let's just go back to Good Shepherd, which was the Methodist church, and we live next door in the parsonage. And he said, my God won't fail me. And I went, oh, okay. And so after 3 hours of being rejected, we ended up outside this place on Wisconsin Avenue in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., and a man had studs, a stud necklace wrapped around his throat. So it was sort of a reflection of my dad's dog collar. And he just said, I have a very talented daughter, and your manager needs to hear her. And this manager comes out and says if she's any good, Reverend, then she can play for tips. And I went in, and once I got settled, I looked and saw there were only men in there, and they were all staring at my father. And one of them said to me, is he in a costume? And I said, oh, no, he's actually a preacher. And, you know, they all looked like variations of the Village People, and some looked like congressmen, to be honest with you. And once they realized that he was really a preacher and I was his daughter, they decided to help us.
Well, that's brilliant. Of course, being in Georgetown, in Washington, in the Beltway, playing for tips in bars. I mean, you literally did play for Tip. You played for Tip O'Neill, wasn't he? Was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, except you didn't know who that was.
No, I didn't. Once I played at Mr. Henry's for a while, then I moved on to other clubs, and finally I was playing around the hotel circuit. I call it the liquid handshake during happy hour. And so I was also playing congressional parties, and that's where I met Tip O'Neill, and he said he was the speaker. I was 14 at the time, and I said, speaker of what? And so I mean, I was young and naive, but by the time I was 17, I kind of was an old hand on the circuit by then.
It also, of course, exposed you to the political culture of your country, and that's something which has informed your songwriting very much. I mean, you were in the book, of course, you describe being up close to events like the failed attempt to rescue the US serviceman from Iran, the collapse of the Jimmy Carter credibility thing. You were up close and personal with that.
Oh, yes. I was playing in Washington at the time and watching a country who was allergic to war, really, because of Vietnam. And watching it before my eyes, and again, although I was only 16, 17, it was a shock to see people change their beliefs. They wanted a strong man because Jimmy Carter couldn't get the hostages back home. And it was such a turning point in American history. And everybody, even George Bush Sr., who was running against Reagan at the time, said that his trickle-down theory was voodoo economics. But then, of course, he became his running mate and sort of joined the Reagan philosophy. And before my eyes, people went from being a anti-war country to let's go nukes.
And that fired up the change and the courage that you write about, but also did it kind of threaten the hope? These are kind of tough times, particularly tough times that we're living through now. How do you sustain that hope?
Well, that's a really challenging question, Reverend, because there are days when I think we all have a little cry, because the world that we welcomed in on New Year's Eve is a very different world. It just is. And so I do think, though, that artists, writers, creatives have something to offer at this time. And I think they can help collate other people's stories and that we're hearing about, and then put them into music or put them into song or put them into a book.
And in all sorts of exciting ways. I mean, I love your adventures in classical music. You did a song cycle for Deutsche Grammophon. You collaborated with the Metropole Orchestra. Jules Buckley was on the programme last week. You do have an enormous appetite, don't you, for challenging not only your listeners but also yourself by finding new things to do and new ways of saying them.
If you don't think that I'm terrified when I do these crazy projects.
Good.
And Deutsche Grammophon came to me and said, we want you to write a song cycle with variations on themes of the masters. And I fell at the piano and almost died. Because when you mess with the masters, you're really playing with fire there. And it's dangerous. You can get it so wrong. So I would go to them. I was talking to these dead guys every day and asking them to guide me and show me. And eventually we, together, I feel like we collaborated to create Night of Hunters.
You've also got that interesting thing, not synesthesia but chromesthesia. It's something which often hallmarks people with prodigious musical gifts, is that you hear things and it produces a kind of visual corollary somehow. Your music is colours and things and shapes.
Well, I'm fascinated how people hear things. And the one thing that I've learned over the years is people hear very differently from each other. They really do. Yeah. And so what I try and do is get all the senses going. So I'm sure with Marian's stories, food is something that shows up in my songs quite a bit. Anything to get all the senses moving, because songs can really do that. They can act like time machines and take you to different times with different people who've been in your life, or take you to places you've never been, just sitting in your chair listening.
It's interesting, isn't it, that in the book you return to your own back catalogue and you kind of use your songs as a way of exploring your own past, and indeed the past we all share by having grown up in it. Do you ever want to revise, revisit, rewrite, do a cover of yourself?
I do a lot of covers of other people. I guess every time we tour, songs do some of them. There are hundreds of them now, but they can repurpose themselves. One of them that did that on the 2017 tour, after, of course, the 2016 election, which saw Donald Trump become America's president. This song, Girl, that was on Little Earthquakes, of all songs, Girl stepped forward and said, I want to take this debate on. I want to not just be a girl, but I want to be America. And the lyric is, she's been everybody else's girl. Maybe one day she'll be her own. Everybody else's girl. Maybe one day, maybe one day she'll be her own. And with democracy on the line, and it's still on the line, the pandemic, of course, is what everyone's talking about. But while the right hand is talking about the pandemic, what in the world is the left hand in American politics doing?
Well, which remains to be seen, but we're very delighted that you continue to raise your voice. Thank you very much, Tori Amos. The songwriter's story of hope, change and courage is out now.